fantastic idea. I love that concept. Gaudi not just working in 3D, working in the fourth dimension. The idea being at different times you'll see a different thing. Incredible. And again, this guy, 26 years old, an incredible use of his imagination. Hi, hello, howdy, how do you do? Welcome to the Hispanophiles podcast, Travel in Spain with only half a brain. This is the juiciest strawberry in your glass of sangria. My name is James Brufrey, and on today's episode, we are bringing out our inner Spanish Hansel and Gretel by taking a look inside Barcelona's Gingerbread house, aka the Casa Vicens, a marvellous piece of work in the Gracia neighbourhood and known colloquially as Antoni Gaudi's first ever work of art. Exciting, isn't it? We'll get there shortly. First and foremost, it's time for our regular segments, which means, number one, the Spanish vocabulary of the week. This one comes from a work exchange I had with a female colleague. Vaya melenas. What a head of hair. Literally, what a mane, as in the thing a male adult lion would have. What a head of hair. Vaya melenas. This came from the fact that I shared with her a photo I found of me at the age of 16 when I was a wee nipper, when I had my big rock and roll melenas, my mane of hair. They used to call me Goldilocks for obvious reasons. I found that while looking up some old photos on the old hard drive. Found it amusing, shared it with a couple of colleagues, and that was her response. Vaya melenas. I didn't know what it meant, so I looked it up, and I thought, ooh, not a bad one that. I think I shall make a little note of that in my smartphone and use it on the next episode. So there we go. Vaya melenas. What a head of hair. Very colloquial, kind of sassy. I do like it. Moving on to the second regular segment, the Spanish news story of the week. So on this podcast, generally speaking, we try to avoid politics and anything that is going to be quite clearly a divisive issue, anything that's sectarian, anything that is partisan politics. We try to avoid as much as possible, more than anything else, because we know you like to find things in your free time to listen to avoid all the horrible politics and the fact that nothing can be neutral nowadays. I'm exactly the same way. But for this one, we do have to bring you a piece of political news because this is pretty big. Pedro Sánchez and the Partido Socialista Obrero Español have announced that the Spanish state plans to normalise the living status of many illegal / undocumented migrants currently in the country. That number is expected to be 500,000. That's the number most commonly cited in news articles that I've been seeing in the past week, with the biggest national contributors being Colombia, Peru and Honduras. So we can expect immigrants from those countries to be the ones trying to take advantage of what is going to be a new opportunity to normalise their status in this country. The criteria to be eligible for it: you need no criminal record, which brings the obvious question, how can you expect an undocumented migrant to be honest about a criminal record if they had one? But that's by the by. And they have to be able to prove that they have been in Spain for 5 months, I believe, consecutively, by the 31st of December 2025. What do people get in exchange? The outcome is going to be a 1-year temporary residency. That gives them the immediate right to work inside the country for that time, with the potential for that to be extended after 1 year, but that is subject to detail and change going forward. This is going to be approved by royal decree, which means it does not go to the parliament, because I think it's quite clear that many of the opposing parties would reject this and fight against it. Processing of these new requests, these new applications, is expected to begin in April this year. That's 2026, if you're listening in the future. The clear response from many conservative and right-wing news outlets has been that this is going to illicitly encourage undocumented and illegal migration to Spain, as many people will probably start to see Spain as an easy option to get into Europe and the Schengen zone. This is not correct. This is normalising people who are already here. Yes, it's possible that this kind of sends a signal to the world as Spain is an easy option if you're trying to get away from a desolate country to live in somewhere more prosperous. But this, for example, won't have any immediate impact on, let's say, the housing market by bringing lots of people in a very short space of time. That's not what this is. It's taking the people who are already here and giving them the paperwork, the documentation, the assets to be included in the political process and in the economy formally. Another conservative talking point I've heard in the past week or so has been that This means that there'll be 500,000 immigrants who are likely to go elsewhere in Europe very quickly, which I think is a little bit silly, because if you're living in Spain, why would you want to go work in Ireland, Slovakia, or Luxembourg? I know I'm a bit biased. Sorry to anybody listening from Ireland, Slovakia, or Luxembourg. Great places, I'm sure, but this podcast is all about promoting Spain, so there we go. This move does bring two clear benefits for the state and for Spanish people generally. Number one, having a lot of people who are currently here illegally get documentation to begin working draws them away from petty crime. Now, this probably won't have any effect on serious organised crime, syndicates, mafias, that type of thing, but people looting, robbing, pickpockets, that type of thing, those who are more desperate, and again, I'm not condoning that type of behaviour, it's disgusting, and if you pickpocket in front of me, watch out. People who turn to that as a last resort because they can't work now are going to be given more opportunity to do so, which is a good thing, I'm sure we can all agree. And having these people work formally and participate in the economy above board means that there's going to be more tax coming for the treasury in a country where the general population often expresses a belief that corruption is widespread. So those 2 points, I think, point at the positives of this move by the PSOE and Pedro Sanchez. In the long term, it is perfectly valid to have concerns about the cultural impact of large-scale migration. That does not make you a racist, and any gaslighting conducted of people who often call themselves activists, they need to look a little bit more in the mirror, I think. The left-wing media, a lot of outlets, a lot of journalists have been saying this is about human rights. That doesn't make sense to me. The first principle of the Enlightenment, if you think the state's job is to provide services to the people, to the populace, rather than, for example, believing in a monarch or an emperor has a divine right to rule given by God, then how can you expect a government to give services to the people if it doesn't know who the people are, if it doesn't know who is in society? Therefore, if you expect government to function and provide services, which is what I think the role of the state should be, you cannot argue that undocumented migration to a foreign country is permissible. Another point worth remembering is Spain has done this before. Between 1986 and 2005, 500,000 undocumented migrants were absorbed by Spain in that time. So it's not as if this is entirely unprecedented. Why is this being done? Again, Podemos, far leftists, and other people inside the PSOE are going to talk about human rights. If you were concerned about human rights, then you would give Spanish residency to the entire population of the world. So that doesn't wash with me. I see this as a clear move by the PSOE, by Pedro Sanchez, to try and bring in a number of people who are likely to vote in their favour in the general election coming August next year. That makes sense. I don't think it's necessary. I think next year the PSOE, while Pedro Sanchez is not entirely popular with many people, they have made some fantastic work, no doubt, in the areas of economics, in relations both domestically and abroad with certain policies, and also in the labour market. Spain's economy is doing very, very well. It bounced back from COVID very quickly. COVID was managed very well, I think, in Spain relative to certain other countries, one of which being the one I was born in. Thus, I think PSOE is the likely candidate for the next administration. Generally speaking, in Spanish politics, the way it works is the incumbent party will continue to rule and be voted in until there is some kind of big countrywide shock like a terrorist attack, or B, a corruption scandal. So if those two things don't happen, and I'm being a resident of Spain, I hope they don't, then I think we're likely to see PSOE come back in next year in August 2027. Otherwise, Vox, the relative regional success they've been having at the moment, they're taking votes away from the Partido Popular, and there's no other big name in politics, I think, in Spain right now that is going to draw votes away from the PSOE. Podemos, I don't think, are serious enough challengers, and otherwise many left-leaning voters would have historically turned toward regional political groups, but the appetite for regionalism, and certainly for separatism, in the past 5 years has declined massively, most notably in Catalonia. Therefore, I think the PSOE is probably going to have it in the bag next year. Moving on, and we come back to Barcelona, my beloved hometown, and we're going to visit the Casa Vicens, a beautiful private home in the north of the city that can be yours to visit. I was there recently. I had a Friday off, had an appointment in the neighbourhood, so I thought I'd come take a look, take some photos, some of which you're going to be seeing if you're watching this episode on YouTube, and I love the place. Antoni Gaudi, if you are someone who listens to this type of content about Spain, I don't need to introduce you to that man. We're going to have a little bit of a chat about him in a second. but his works are dotted all around Barcelona, Catalonia, and even some further afield, and I do love visiting them. So, after a morning there, I thought it would be a great idea to make an episode dedicated to this particular site of interest. The very basics. Casa Vicens, named after Manuel Vicens y Montaner, a stockbroker and merchant in the Barcelona region, born in 1836, died in 1895, so at the ripe old age of 59. In 1878, he inherited a plot of land from his mother on Carrer de les Carolines, harder to say than I imagined, in the Gracia neighbourhood of Barcelona. It's very leftist, lots of independent stores, very hipster, artisan. I love it. It's highly walkable, there's not too much traffic, therefore it's also quite safe. It's pretty, it's colourful. One of my favourite parts of town by a country mile. Here, in this plot of land, he commissioned a summer residence to be built for him and his family on the outskirts of the city at the time, before the Eixample project had been completed, and he turned to one Antoni Gaudi, a 26-year-old recent architect graduate. The two were friendly. Gaudi would often spend time in the Vicens y Montaner residences. Manuel Vicens's criteria for the house: it had to be A, pleasant to look at, B, functional for him and his family, C, seamless with nature around it. Something quite interesting he specified. He wanted it to blend in with the trees and foliage all around rather than being something that stuck out. And D, he wanted it facing southwest for less direct sunlight exposure in the hot summer months. Otherwise, Antoni Gaudi had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to build this house. Like I said, he was only 26, he was a recent graduate, and this basically was his first project post-graduation. And what Gaudi did, he threw a bunch of ideas together for what he thought the perfect private residency would look like, and he tried a lot of them out in the Casa Vicens. The plan, the first draft, was submitted on the 15th of January 1883, and Gaudi finished the Casa Vicens in 1885. One source I saw said 1888, but we're going to stick with 85 for the remainder of this episode. This means that the Casa Vicens officially predates the modernist architectural movement in Barcelona, but many motifs we're going to discuss are common to the other modernist buildings of Gaudi and other architects, so it kind of culturally does fit the modernism of the late 19th century, early 20th century, even if it doesn't technically belong to that category. In 1899, Vicens's widow, Dolores Giralt, sold the Casa Vicens to Antoni Jover y Puig. I think I've got that right. In 1925, the house changed hands once again, this time going into the portfolio of Joan Baptista Serra de Martínez. Serra de Martínez decided to extend the property, the east side, the eastward facade, the eastward limit of the house. They built there, they added a chapel separate from the house, away from the house, and in here there was a mineral water fountain. In the Iberian Peninsula in Spain, managing water has always been a big topic. There's never been a time in Spain when water management has been easy compared to the rest of Europe. And this mineral water fountain apparently had healing qualities. Therefore, they dedicated it to Santa Rita, the patron saint of impossible causes. Her day is the 22nd of May. But the Santa Rita chapel was demolished in May 1963, and that decision was taken by architect Antoni Pineda. Later, the Barcelona City Council commissioned for the street in front of it in Les Carolines to be widened. I didn't find a date for this, but this is the reason why you can drive past it nowadays. In 1969, the Spanish government declared the Casa Vicens a historic artistic monument of national interest, 10 years after allowing visa-free travel from European countries for the first time. So again, in this part of the very late era of the dictatorship, we can see the government under Franco doing its best to find ways to increase interest in many of the provinces, in many of the regions, many of the cities for the sake of tourism. In 2005, the Casa Vicens was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and in 2014 acquired by Morabank, before more restorative work was undertaken in 2017 by Spanish architects José Antonio Martínez La Peña, Elias Torres Tur, and David García Martínez. They deliberately tried to get the Casa Vicens as close to the finished Gaudi version as they could, albeit with some caveats. And on the 16th of November 2027, it opened to the public once again to visit. That's a brief timeline. When you get there, the audio guide says you should have your own interpretation of the house. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I think it looks like a gingerbread house from the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. It's got white and green and red frosting on the outside, above a gingerbread base and a sort of reddy, browny colour, with little dimples of chocolate running on the underside of the ledges that look like chocolate buttons to me, and a gingerbread house is what it reminds me of. Antoni Gaudi, let's take a look at him. Born in 1852 in Tarragona province. The source I saw said Reus, but I think it's not confirmed. I might do an episode about Gaudi later on. If there's interest in that, please let me know in comments. He is a fascinating man after all. He studied art at the Escola de la Llotja. Again, apologies for my terrible Catalan pronunciation, it's not a language I speak. And he studied architecture at the Escola Provincial de Arquitectura de Barcelona. He was extremely studious, extremely hardworking, pored over literature. In the libraries, always there. He was a polymath. He was fascinated by many subjects, and this is something that is very apparent when you start to study his work and visit some of the sites that he designed and built. He combines horticulture, botany, astronomy, chemistry, physics, the animal kingdom, biblical scenes and figures. All of this manifests itself in his work in different times, in different places. All of this contributed to his work and gave him ideas as to what he could use to decorate the buildings and sites that he was working on. In his early 30s, he wasn't particularly eccentric. He was kind of like a normal, studious, industrious guy. But from then on, religion became an increasingly important part of his life. He was very pious. In his later life, he rarely missed communion, he rarely missed mass. He shied from attention, he didn't give interviews, there are very few photos of him, he didn't leave memoirs, there's not too much written documentation that survived from Gaudi himself. He was dogmatic, he was puritanical, much to the annoyance of the bourgeois socialite class of early 20th century Barcelona. Picasso, for one, absolutely hated him, couldn't stand the man. He was aesthetic, he was austere, he was vegetarian but often fasted, a habit that started in 1894, I'm told. He also rarely left Catalonia. I think he went to France on a couple of occasions, didn't like it, and therefore stayed in Catalonia. Rarely spoke Castellano, preferred speaking Catalan, but his patron Güell shared lots of materials that he had acquired on his travels in different countries to show Gaudi how his contemporaries in other countries were exploring ideas in their own modernist architecture. This fascinated Gaudi, and he did what he could, even though not having visited these different places, to take what he saw as suitable and appropriate and attractive in his own designs. In his late life, he dedicated much of his time and energy to the Sagrada Familia. Of course he did. He lived in a small house on the grounds of Parc Güell. He was up at 7 o'clock every day. He took Mass in Gracia, then he would work on the Sagrada Familia, his magnum opus, before attending an evening Mass in the Gothic cathedral down on La Aitana. The 10th of June, 1926, a couple of days after an accident, he died. What was that accident? The man got hit by a frigging tram on Gran Via. He was hospitalised of his injuries. A few days later, he died. Apparently, his hygiene was so poor, his clothes were so shabby, people thought he was a homeless guy, a bum, a tramp in the street. People didn't really want to touch him. Then, when at the hospital, people realised who he was. He wasn't a rich man late in life, so that probably didn't help him get very good medical care quickly. And a couple of days later, like I said, he died of his injuries after being hit by a tram. I know, RIP, you shouldn't joke about these things, but if you're going to get hit by a vehicle, come on, pick something more impressive. A drag racer, a monster truck, a Shinkansen bullet train in Japan, not a stupid little tram, for God's sake. But there we go, that's Antoni Gaudi. The reason I spend 5 minutes dedicated to him is to give context around the house itself, what he was trying to do, and some of his motivations and interests, obsessions that manifest themselves very visibly for the first time in Castellvicens. So we arrive, we climb out of the metro station at Fontana, we walk across a couple of streets, we go to Carrer de les Carolines, and we come to the front door. €24 gets you entry for one. There are some concessions for students, seniors, that type of thing. Scan the QR code with your phone and get the audio guide, and you'll be instructed to put your backpack, your jacket, in a locker that is free of charge next to the entrance. So you walk in, Barcelona's Gingerbread house. You start on the northeast facade and take a look up. You see straight away repetition of what you saw from the front, which is The same white, green and yellow tiles running up the wall. The bottom story of the house you see sandy stone as the primary material used for the walls, with a couple of windows that have cream coloured exterior shutters and the same green and white stripes cutting across the lower story. Then looking up to the second story, we see the ginger part of the gingerbread, the brown colour that's slightly reddish in tone. This part has tiles placed over that gingerbread, and those are far more abundant on the second story. The pillars of gingerbread covered in white-green icing point upward and support a roof that juts out slightly above you. This therefore forms thin windows on the second floor, with the white and green tiles far more pronounced on the second floor of the house than the first one. With the first one, consider it a bit of a base for your gingerbread cake. Specific on this facade of the house, the northeast facade, is a line of coloured green-white tiles that go from the floor to the roof. These were added deliberately to indicate the former border of the house. Remember, Serra de Martínez extended the northeast side of the house, and this vertical line of tiles tells you left is the new part, right is the Gaudi part. It's a subtle thing, easy to miss, but a little bit of history for you there. On each corner of the roof, we can see some towers pointing up to the heavens. The same decorative themes of the exterior repeated, but on cylinders rather than just on the walls. Now take a look around you. You are in a courtyard. There's a small cafe behind you with some seating outside. And you begin to walk around. We get to the western corner of the building. We see a single light chandelier hanging outside, made of wrought iron. Very dark, very gothic. There are curling elements of the chandelier that culminate in a sharp point at the bottom. Inside it is a dark green glass light, and I think this lamp looks like a Slytherin Horcrux. If you don't get that reference, shame on you, you should. This chandelier, this lamp, is hanging over a small bench, which is a very popular spot for photos. And if you look up at the second floor, you'll see cherub statues that are sat casually on the ledge overlooking the garden from the upstairs balcony. I call them Hansel and Gretel specifically. That garden, let's talk about it. The current size, 300 square metres. It was formerly far larger. Again, Manuel Vicens inherited the plot of land from his mother before the entire Gracia neighbourhood had been built up so much. This was a plot of land on the outskirts of the city. This garden used to have a waterfall facing the house. The western perimeter nowadays still has lots of plants and trees, and these are exotic, imported trees, mostly coming from East Asia, giving it a beautiful oriental touch to the house, and many are also from the tropical Americas, Mexico, I think, some of the Caribbean islands as well. Some of these are original trees that were planted in the Gaudi era, but I understand also that some have been planted more recently. Nevertheless, it's still a very pleasant garden and gives you a nice bit of shade as well as you're walking up to the house. So we continue to walk round through the garden, through the courtyard. The western side, looking at. This, for me, is the most beautiful exterior part of the house. We look up straight away. The roof above this points up to another circular tower that is placed on the very top, and this part is heavily decorated with that green and white icing, those tiles with yellow flowers depicted on them also. It is said that what Gaudi was trying to achieve with the Casa Vicens was to have a visual representation of ivy growing up the house. Now, do green and white tiles going up and along the building represent this? I think quite possibly. I think that makes total sense. Again, ceramics, due to the quality of clay in much of Catalonia and the Valencia Comunidad as well, is a very, very popular material for building and decorating in Spain. However, it was normally traditional in Spain to use ceramics for the interior of your house alone. The bathroom, the kitchen, that type of thing. Gaudi, being the clever little cookie he is, decided to break from this norm. He would use ceramic tiles that he bought in bulk on the exterior of the house, in the courtyard, wherever possible, because he saw it as a very convenient building material that he could use to make his works as attractive as possible, whilst also being affordable. He would bulk buy the same tile designs to benefit from an economy of scale by buying vast amounts from the same manufacturer. This would give his buildings, his works, consistency, aesthetically, visually, in and outside the house, because the same colour tiles would be used all over. Another cost-saving principle that concerns ceramics and tiles that Gaudi pioneered is the trencadís, one of the signature visual elements of Barcelona that the world is most familiar with. A Trencadís is Gaudi's gift to modern design. Indeed, it's very closely associated with him. When we think of Gaudi, you probably picture a Trencadís in your head, and it's so popular in the city, courtesy of him, that a Trencadís is also very much synonymous with Barcelona. But what is it? Essentially, Gaudi would take smashed tiles that he could find and pottery and use them to cover a wall or surface that otherwise would have been tricky. Smashed tiles, not being square all the time, would make it a little bit easier to cover convex walls, concave walls, curving benches, archways, but also this allowed him to save money. People would throw away tiles all the time. He would go to building sites and pick this stuff up quite easily. If he had a place to store and collect them, it would be next to nothing, getting all of these smashed tiles that he could then use in a very imaginative and original way. Now, if you're not familiar, the Catalonians are known in Spain as being the skinflints. The tight-fisted, the ones that won't open their wallet to you to buy you a drink. They're known as being the cheapos here in Spain. I can't possibly comment, that's the stereotype. But I will say, Gaudi reusing tiles from other people, from other building sites for his own designs, let's just say it kind of fits the mould. Sorry, Catalonia. It's worth pointing out that the Casa Vicens actually doesn't have a Trencadís. It's just something I wanted to talk about. We continue around the path and we get to the steps to the main entrance of the Casa Vicens, to the Gingerbread house, and we see wrought iron railings leading up the steps. Black wrought iron. The exterior door, the main door, also has a black wrought iron grille in front of it. On this design, we see flowers in bloom creeping up the door inside circles. Here we see an evergreen and black Horcrux lamp outside the main door. And all of this wrought iron, it's dark, it's gothic, it's heavy. It reminds me of Torre Bellesguard, my favourite Gaudi work and the subject of episode 11 of the Hispanophiles podcast. Go take a listen if you haven't yet. We walk inside and we get to the atrium and the dining room. The entrance hall has been designed to be an extension of the garden thematically coming into the house. Again, one of the main criteria that Manuel Vicens specified to Gaudi was that the house was to be at one in harmony with nature all around it. As we walk in, we see those yellow flowers on the green and white tiles, and we enter the door to our left and we see on it carpentry. Very beautiful, very delicate, inspired by Japanese art. Again, another example of Gaudi, while not visiting these places, consuming material brought back that he could incorporate into his genius, into his designs. We walk to our left, we go in, we get to the dining room, and here we do see a visual aesthetic change. We go from gingerbread to a pot of gold. Gold, caramel, burgundy all around you. It's really warm, very powerful, but dark, and a real sense of luxury about the place. Low lighting emphasises quite a lot as well. The relief on the walls, ivy foliage, again, it's a clear attempt to recreate garden scenes inside the primary room on the ground floor. There's a fabulous iron chandelier waiting for you inside the dining hall. Less heavy and less severe, let's use that word, than the Horcruxes you found outside. And all of this is served to you beneath a ribbed ceiling with more floral motifs in brown and gold built into them. That's something you're going to see repeating throughout the Casa Vicens. The dining room contains a lot of restored original furniture from the Gaudi era. Most of it is in what I think is mahogany wood, a very rich, beautiful colour, placed along the walls to give visitors as much space as possible to be able to walk, in particular clumsy children. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Here we also see some original paintings by Francesc Torres Casança y Sellares. I wasn't too keen on these paintings, but take a look for yourself. They do add a touch of levity to what would otherwise be quite an intense room. There's a fireplace on the northern wall pointing up to the ceiling with those ribs with green branches with red berries carved into it. And either side you see doors to the outside terrace. These doors are very, very large, and into the roof of the doors Gaudi put paintings, very realistic paintings, of songbirds to imply easy access from the inside to the outside. And now we move to the porch. Still on the ground floor, this is the bit that extends out from the house that we were looking at from the outside just a few minutes ago. The first thing you'll notice are wooden shutters painted a pale cream. Very interesting design. Not particularly detailed, just very eccentric in what Gaudi was trying to do here. Each of these shutter blinds is what I'll call them. We see 4 panels of 3 wooden blocks side by side, running parallel to each other at right angles. So 3 wooden blocks running parallel, but then at right angles to each of those wooden blocks is another 3 pointing perpendicular to the previous one. I know, very, very strange design. These are set at an angle to keep sunlight out, but the thin gaps between the wooden blocks allows for a cool breeze to pass into the porch. Next thing you'll see, beneath these shutter blinds are 4 wooden benches over a low concrete wall with, again, white and green tiles. The next thing you see, in the middle of 2 of those benches, is a round fountain made of marble, I think. I can't remember touching it, but it looks like marble to me. Shaped like a bird bath, with gargoyle faces on the underside of this bird bath fountain, spitting out water below. Above this marble bird bath fountain is a very curious piece that is referred to in the audio guide as the spider web, I think. Wrought iron, again black, so adding a touch of the Gothic. The spider web sits above the fountain and allows water to trickle down it, through which light, coming at different angles, will be refracted, and depending on where you're sat on those wooden benches in the porch, will give a different view as the colour is thrown away across the porch in different angles. Fantastic idea. I love that concept. Again, I love Gaudi not just working in 3D, working in the 4th dimension. The idea being at different times when you sat there, you'll see a different thing. Incredible. And again, this guy, 26 years old, an incredible use of his imagination. After the garden was reduced in size, this circular fountain was moved to a private residence somewhere in Girona, but has now been recovered and sits in its original location in the porch. After that, the one thing you're going to be noticing inside this covered porch is the ceiling. And this is extremely extravagant. We've got 2 domes of midnight blue with palms crossing them inside. Again, that connection with the outside world, with the trees just a few metres away from you. And these are lined with concave arches that are brown and orange with even more floral motifs painted onto them. The exterior of the porch, we didn't really look at this as we were outside because we wanted to get inside, but let's talk about it right now. Each 3 sides has ancient Catalan text written in dark green. Again, dark green, what does it remind us of? The Islamic world. Apparently Gaudi was inspired by Mudéjar architecture in Toledo, in Sevilla, in Córdoba, and incorporated those into this part of it. Again, those places, Catalan not widely spoken, but he took the aesthetic principle of Mudéjar architecture, of Mudéjar design, and applied that to a Catalan context. Very unique. I don't recall ever seeing anything like that in other Gaudi works, but I've not been to all of them yet, and if you do know of something like that done at another place that he designed, please let me know in comments. We are going to finish the ground floor in what is my favourite room of the entire house, the smoking room. This apparently was Gaudi's room for the boys, for the gentlemen, for the lads. Ladies, I'm sorry, you will get your own room, the Casa Vicens. We're going to get to that. And no, I'm not talking about the kitchen. No, I would never make such a joke. That's not me. Come on. And besides, I can cook way better than any woman listening to this podcast episode right now. The wealthier classes of 19th century continental Europe, the people, the merchants, the people with capital, with assets, a room built specifically for smoking apparently was quite a common thing. A fire hazard? Yeah, maybe, but still, that's what they liked. This is a place where Manuel Vicens and his friends could blaze up that dirty reefer, and apparently this is where Gaudi encouraged them to connect with nature, whatever the hell that means when you're high. Again, Catalonia being one of the parts of Spain where marijuana has now been decriminalised. The first thing you noticed here in the smoking room is that it's almost completely blue. A fabulous rich hue of blue. It immediately made me think of Aladdin, like the Arabian Nights type thing. That apparently is partly intentional. We'll get to that. We see blue and white tiles on the bottom half of the smoking room with windows with those cream shutters, once again limiting natural light to the smoking room, with blue, cyan and purple glass windows. But then up the walls we see blue and gold foliage and the ceiling. This is the best part of the entire house for me. Made of paper mache, which whoever think that would be a suitable material to build a smoking room is just go ahead and make the room out of tobacco, for God's sake. No, this is where we see that fabulous, rich, midnight blue, made of lots and lots of curved muqarnas. We'll explain that in a second. With gold tips across them, green and yellow berry clusters placed between the muqarnas that supposedly were there to represent palm leaves filled with dates. Again, another thing that Al-Andalus and modern Spain inherited from the Near East, the Arabic world. Dates. A muqarna, I had to look this up. The Castellano word is muqarabe. A muqarna is a series of alcoves, uniform in size, placed together purely for decoration. This is something very typical in Persian and Central Asian architecture. In Europe, not so much. The Almohads in particular did not indulge their architecture in Morocco and south of Spain with these muqarnas. Not something you see in many places in Spain, but again, this is Gaudi incorporating a bit of Asia in the design of his house. And a complete contrast to what you've seen so far on the ground floor, from the dining room, from the porch. After Gaudi's time, after he died in 1926, a lot of this was painted gold, but restorative work took place in the smoking room to bring it back to that very handsome shade of blue. One thing that's really apparent in this particular part of the house, the lighting has been applied very cleverly in this part of the house to show off the relief of the muqarnas, of those concave alcoves, meaning that some stand in shade while some stand in direct light, which gives a really powerful impression that the ceiling is bigger than it is, which is maybe why it makes me think of being in the first scene in the Disney Aladdin film. Anyway, for me, what I like about the smoking room is this shows Antoni Gaudi at his most experimental and playful in his youth, before he became rather sober and pious, which, particularly Palauel, you don't see such a contrast from room to room in terms of colour, in terms of trying different visual elements. For me, that is what makes the Casa Vicens such a beautiful place to visit. You could argue, does a deliberate lack of consistency from room to room in the Casa Vicens compromise its artistic value and beauty? I don't think so. I think quite the opposite. I think, if anything, it gives us an opportunity to enter Gaudi's mind in his mid-20s and explore his early thought process. Disagree with me if you want to. We come out of the smoking room, we go by the dining room, we come to the stairwell. The stairwell is the worst preserved part of Gaudi's Casa Vicens. The original one was demolished by Serra de Martínez during his extension, and the current one was completed in 2014. There's not too much information or photo evidence of what the original one was like before this took place, but hey, it's time to go to the first floor. We enter what is assumed to be the bedroom of the daughter of Manuel Vicente Montaner and Dolores Giralt, what I call the pink room. Pink on both the walls and the door. The top third of the wall, we see light green foliage with more branches, white flowers this time, blossoming over green leaves, a much less heavy look, a lot more spring and early summer. Plus, when you look at this, you get an impression of looking directly out to the treetop. Again, being on the first floor, that is thematically relevant. That kind of makes sense with what Gaudi would have been going for. Between the wall and the ceiling, we see connecting elements reminiscent of the exterior of the house, with a roof of white gold ribs, again, recurring theme, with vegetation between them. I see here beds of lettuce, big green leaves, waiting to be plucked and put in a salad. Sadly, this part of the house does not look so much like a gingerbread house to me. We have a full-length window to the street. Otherwise, the pink room is a little lacking in features. It's connected to the bathrooms and the other rooms on the floor by hexagonal hallways. The bathrooms. 19th century Barcelona, running water was a novelty and a luxury for many houses, certainly inside. But on the first floor of the Casa Vicens, we see a bathing space, a dressing room, and a bog lavatory purposefully designed by Gaudi for the family Vicens and Giralt. Again, we see a thematic shift away from what we've seen so far in the house. Blue and white square tiles. These rooms remind me of a US diner, but one horizontal strip of blossoming flowers on tree branches above the blue and white tiles links, connects, brings the bathrooms back to the rest of the house in the idea of a garden entering the house and spreading itself across the walls. Above the blue and white tiles, we see a kind of syrupy brown colour on the wall, with a painted white skirting between the articulating elements between the wall and the roof, with chocolate brown coloured ceiling ribs and more lettuces placed between them. Moving next door to the main bedroom. This is the largest room on the second floor and sits directly above the dining room, split into two parts. This apparently used to be two separate rooms, one for Manuel Vicens and one for Dolores Giralt, one for each spouse. Apparently that was kind of common for upper classes at the time, and I'm sure there was zero emotional strain or communication difficulties in their relationships having it that way. The floor very smooth, sand coloured with white flecks, and a repeated geometric design on the floor tiles and the marble on the floor forms a line to indicate where the two bedrooms were split, that you can now see quite clearly because the dividing wall has been removed. On one side, blue, on the other, pink. So the two halves of this, what is now one room, complement but don't match. They're not identical. We do on the top half of the wall see more arboreal, woodland motifs with joining elements to the ceiling below, once again, a ribbed roof. We see gold coloured ribs this time with squat leaves reminiscent of Brussels sprouts. That's what I saw when I looked at these, with hardy dark brown acorns dotted in clusters between those leaves. From the main bedroom, we walk toward the windows to another balcony. This is directly above the porch we were sat in a few moments ago. Either side here in the main bedroom, we have a door, and after going through the door, you walk down a couple steps to get to that balcony. This puts the balcony and the railings of the balcony below the main room and therefore out of sight. A clever little thing. I don't know why more buildings don't do this. This allows people sat inside the room to enjoy an unobstructed view of the trees from the balcony railing directly. We step out into the sunlight once again. We see a bench railing, a concept repeated very famously in the Parc another famous image of Barcelona. And we turn to face the building and look up. This is my favourite facade once again. The bit that looks like a gingerbread house, lemon sorbet coloured shutters on both doors, brown benches outside, green and white tiles with yellow flowers climbing the columns between the two doors, horizontal rows of green tiles with yellow flowers above the stone, and then with those long, thin columns with green and white tiles placed over the gingerbread brick design. Here also we see a final Gothic slivering wrought iron Horcrux lamp connected to the wall. Back inside, and we're going to go to the women's room, the blue room sitting above the smoking room. That was the men's room directly below. A small room for socialising, for the women to gather and share gossip and spin a yarn or two. Unfortunately, all original furniture has now been removed, so there's not too many features around you as you walk in. We see copper-coloured walls, fairly plain with dirty gold furnishings and articulations between walls and ceiling. But what a ceiling. Again, another complete break from what we've seen thematically and aesthetically so far in the Casa Vicens. You look up, you see a giant circle. Then we have three exterior rings of white-green tiles with yellow flowers. But then if you cast your mind back to what we saw on the outside of the house, those long columns of green and white, here there are 16 representations of those columns pointing to the middle of that circle on the ceiling. Blue sky between, with clouds represented, birds flying about, and then in the middle of the circle we see a big chocolate buttons on gingerbread with a dome in the centre. What are we looking at? Gaudi tried to make the ceiling reflect what you would be looking at if there was no ceiling, i.e. looking straight up at one of the towers on top of the Casa Vicens. And it's so realistic. You look at the birds painted on the tiles, phenomenal, beautiful. I don't recall seeing something like that in any other Gaudi work I've visited. Again, if I'm wrong, please do let me know in comments and tell me where I need to go to find something like that. The ladies' room has a small balcony with more lemon sorbet wooden shutters, that kind of pale yellow cream colour I've been talking about. Next door we have the blue room. The main motif on the wall is a repeated flower, which is referred to as the Flower of Christ, which was used extensively later on at the Sagrada Familia. We go out, we walk up the stairwell to the top floor, to the attic, and here are the exhibitions that the Casa Vicens has on display for us to peruse. The attic, quite bland. No floral decorations, no foliage motifs, nothing representing lettuces or Brussels sprouts or acorns or palm trees. White featureless walls. This part of the house was for the staff. of the house. The people employed to cook, clean, all the rest of it, be nannies, I don't know. There was no desire to waste resources on making this part of the house attractive for them. Shame, but it is what it is. The attic needed to be simple, enough to be functional and dry. High ceiling allows this part of the building to serve as a thermal regulator. Again, hot air rising, large windows all around. This would allow hot air to leave the house naturally in the hot months. Remember, this is a summer residence. That also allows the house to kind of auto-regulate its temperature without the need for mechanical or electric power, which, again, something relatively rare at the turn of the last century. Now, however, in the attic, we do see a bunch of exhibitions that are worth taking some time to explore. Pieces of original furniture made for the Casa Vicens by Gaudi and possessions of Manuel Vicens and Dolors Gilalt. On display, we have one original text from Gaudi. Now, remember, going back to the beginning of the episode, I said there was not many surviving archives, documents, anything he wrote. We don't have that much in existence, regrettably, nowadays. A lot of it was lost in the 30s in Spain. You take a look at it, you see very quickly it is very scribbly, scruffy writing. Lots of amendments, lots of things have been crossed out, and it's assumed to be a draft text that he never wanted to publish, known as the Manuscript of Reus. Again, he didn't call it that. That's the title that's been given to it. It is a commentary, it is his own reflections on what an ideal family house, what an ideal summer residency in the city should be. And it's also it's also a lament about the disappearance of a lot of the unbuilt upon land in northern Barcelona at the time, as the city was expanding as a consequence of the industrial era. A lot of space was needed for accommodation for the working class people in Barcelona, and Gaudi was famously critical of the Eixample project. But he needn't have been, because it's turned out to be quite a breadwinner and something of an attraction in its own right in Barcelona. Also here on exhibition we see a collection of scale models, the largest of which is an unpainted model of the Casa Vicens, the original design pre-Joan Baptista Serra de Martínez, including garden and full plot. And there is also a 1927 scale model of the Casa Vicens post Serra de Martínez and his changes, which is more closely related to the one that you're inside right now. Also in the attic there are some electronic tablets offering information in Spanish, Catalan, English and French, I think, of the other Gaudi projects and sites, and a timeline of the Casa Vicens history. From the attic, you take a door to the rooftop terrace. You can't walk on all of it. The part you can walk is the flat rooftop that was part of the Serra de Martínez extension. The original view here would have been way different. Again, there would have been far fewer tall buildings and less restricted view, probably more trees. Make of that what you will, we can't change the past. The hills on the north side, as we look toward the mountains, would have been probably visible. And the other side, looking southward, looking eastward, you would have seen much of downtown Barcelona as it would have been in the 1880s and 90s. You may have even been able to catch a glimpse of the Sagrada Familia being constructed in its very early days. Yeah, I'm not sure. In here we see the simple red gingerbread brick and tiles with those towers around the edges in green and white tiles with yellow flowers representing icing over the entire gingerbread house. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. Guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope I've inspired you to go and check out something else amazing in Barcelona, in Catalonia and Spain. The Gingerbread House of Barcelona, Gaudi's first ever work, and something that I think is kind of little known compared to many of his more famed sites across the city. We finish with the usual segment, which is of course the Spanish recommendation of the week, and it is calçot season. So I recommend going to a calçotada when you can. What is a calçot? It is a Catalan delicacy. Basically a spring onion, or a particular variety of spring onion, that you grill on a barbecue. You peel the outer layer off, you dip it in romesco sauce, and you enjoy. Calçot season right now. It's not my favourite dish in the world, but it is something that is associated with the arrival of spring here. So get your pals, get some drinks, go to have a little barbecue, and go calçot crazy. Thank you guys so much for your time and for listening to the Hispanophiles podcast, Travel in Spain with only half a brain. If you've gotten this far, guys, thank you very much. Why not give the channel a subscribe, a like on the video, a comment, but more importantly, enjoy your day, and I hope to see you walking around the wonderful neighbourhood of Gracia soon. Take care, guys. Adieu. But that's by the by.